Thank you very much. I have to say I'm really quite excited by the last presentation because I am actually using some of your old data in my research. So today I'll be talking about my collaborative doctoral award project, which is between the University of Bradford and the Historic Environment Scotland. So the presentation, it's all about my PhD research, which is funded by the AHRC. So I am looking at 3 Iron Age rock sites and their associated structures in Shetland using 3D imaging. So I'll be going through what I'm up to so far. Okay, just to give you a quick outline of what I'm talking about today. So I'll be going through my project, its aims and objectives. I'll give you a quick overview of the 3 sites that I'm looking at, for those of you who don't know them. I'll cover the ways that I've been collecting new 3D data with my partners at HES here at the Engine Shed, and what I've been doing with the existing datasets that I'm also using in the project. Then I'll go through a couple of case studies that I'm currently going through to look at some of the ways that I've been researching the sites using both of these types of data and the things that I have planned for the future. So, to summarise, I think the overall key aim of my PhD is to learn more about the people who used these Iron Age sites of Old Scatness, Mousa and Jarlshof in the past, particularly looking at the Iron Age, and to look into how the buildings were made and used during that time. So to do this, I've done some new laser scan and photogrammetry surveys to have a current record of sites with staff from Historic Environment Scotland. Also, I'm using these older data sets that I've mentioned to look at past changes and wear on sites. And also, importantly, all of this data is useful because it helps to provide information that can be used by my PhD partners who are working on conservation and management plans for the sites, which are on the UK's tentative World Heritage Sites list. So this is just to show you whereabouts in the world I'm looking at. The sites of Old Scatness and Jarlshof are down at the very bottom of the mainland of Scotland, Shetland, sorry, and Mousa Broch is a bit further up north on the island of Mousa, which is now uninhabited. So kindly, we've already heard a bit about Brochs today, so I'm going to actually just skip through this slide because I think now by this time we're all Broch experts. But this image here by Alan Brady does show you quite a nice reconstruction drawing of what tentatively Brochs looks like in the past, in the Iron Age. So the 3 sites I'm looking at, Mousa, you've already heard about this one from the previous presentation. It's the best preserved Broch site in Scotland, arguably one of the most famous as well. Its key features are the double walls that were mentioned previously, and also, as it's fully intact, you can enter the interior and go all the way up to the tops of the walls. The second site I'm looking at is Jarlshof. So presented very, very differently to Mousa. It's archaeologically significant, as it's got so many different periods of occupation and architecture which are still surviving into the present day. Dating from the late Bronze Age through to the Iron Age, the Pictish period, Viking period, through to the post-medieval settlements on the sites as well. So the Iron Age structures, these were discovered back in the 19th century and excavated through into the mid-20th century. And some of the Broch and Iron Age structures have eroded into the sea. So the areas I'm particularly interested in are these highlighted in the yellow. So you can see where the end of the seawall is. That's some of the structures that I'm looking at, including the Broch and some of the later Iron Age wheelhouses. And then last but not least, I'm looking at Old Scatness. Now, unlike Mousa and Jarlshof, this site was unknown until relatively recently. It was accidentally discovered during the construction of the roadworks for the Sunborough Airport back in 1973. So it was excavated in great detail by the University of Bradford and Shetland Amenity Trust from 1995 until 2006. So in contrast to the previous 2 sites, what we have here is a full archaeological excavation that was done using modern scientific methods. And we've got all these archives and all of this information stored in Bradford. So, put all together, these sites, they're all presented very differently today. They've all been consolidated, but to different extents. And together they form this tentative World Heritage Sites, which is what I'm looking at them collectively. So we've been hearing a lot about digital documentation. So for the last 2 summers, I've been producing new high-resolution survey data with my project partners. So we've been laser scanning all 3 sites. So we've been doing terrestrial laser scanning, and then I've also been doing some photography using a photographic mast with some volunteers from Archaeology Shetland, that you can see in the picture to your right-hand side. And that's just to really complement the scan data to get extra information from areas which the scanners couldn't really reach, so like the Mousa and Old Scatness that you can see there. And another thing I'm doing is looking at existing data which I've acquired through my project partners, so from Shetland Amenity Trust, the University of Bradford and AHRC. So what I'm doing with this is I'm digitising film slides which were provided for me from the Old Scatness excavations. I'm testing photogrammetry on such slides and on old consolidation photos based on the methods that the Curious Travellers project has been developing at the University of Bradford. I'm also creating CAD versions of excavation and survey drawings to compare to the new digital data. And then lastly, I've been reviewing images, written accounts, reports, all sorts of different written accounts of the free sites that are also held in these archives to develop the site's biographies. So I'm collecting an awful lot of information. So I thought, with this limited time, I'll give you 2 examples of the ways that I'm looking at the data now, about a year and a half into the project. So the first case study, so this is what I've been doing most recently. I've been analysing past surveys of Mousa. So today we've already seen some of Henry Dryden's very nice 1850s illustrations of Brochs. So I've been looking at his 1855 drawings of Mousa. And I wanted to see how old survey drawings differ to the new point clouds produced this year. So the key thing is to find out why these vary actually, and that's something I haven't quite got to yet. You know, whether these are surveyor errors or whether they actually represent actual changes to these structures in the last 150 years or so. I think that would be quite significant. So I was provided with some high-resolution scans of original drawings by Dryden from the 1850s. So what I did was create some scaled AutoCAD 3D line drawings from these. Then I was able to create a slice through point cloud data at the same position as the drawing to basically see how these match up in 3D space at the right scale and align together. So to do this, I had to make the point cloud a bit more manageable, so I decimated this to about 60 million points to make it manageable in AutoCAD 3D. Then what I did was digitally remove the wire mesh that covers the top of Mousa Broch right now, which is to prevent birds from getting inside it. And I also took out the more modern entrance door as well to make it more comparable with the 1850s data. So then I was able to convert this into a format that was readable in AutoCAD. And in doing so, I could compare this directly to Dryden's drawing. So what I did with his drawing was I also digitised this. So I traced his illustrations into 3D polylines and then aligned that with a point cloud. So and then what I created with the point cloud was I created a slice that was under a centimetre thick. So you can really line by line match exactly where these features should be lining up. And as you can see, they don't really line up in some parts. I think in particularly from 9 metres below and lower, the broch walls are quite far out. I found that Dryden drew them much narrower than they actually are in their present form. Currently they're a lot thicker, and I found that the variation, it ranges from between 15 to 35 centimetres more on just one side of the wall, so that's quite interesting. Also, he presents the intramural galleries much more, a lot straighter than they are in real life. The scan data shows them in profile. They have this kind of beehive shape, which represents a lot of corbelling that was done to build up the ceilings. And another interesting feature I found was that the water tank is a lot lower in Dryden's drawing than in the scan data, a whole about 37 centimetres lower. And his floor levels are lower too, and I need to do a bit more investigation into this to know whether it was more to do with later consolidation in the early 20th century, whether this was that inaccurate. But what Dryden did in his drawing was, it wasn't just a thin slice through the data, he essentially drew what he could see through the Brochs if you did split the whole structure in half, and then he drew everything he could see. So this model just shows you a plain view that was directly comparable. And here you can see the staircase isn't quite in the right place, never mind. And the walls are much lower than at present as well, so very wall tops. The interior openings, the upper ones are well lined, but others aren't. So, in summary, really, we're finding quite a lot of variations, and I need to cross-check this with historic reports and photos to see whether these are changes that did happen after his survey drawings were produced. So, quickly moving on to my second case study. This is something else I've been doing pretty recently. I've been going through images of Old Scatness, which were taken as consolidation record photos back in 2015, so not that old, but they were never taken with photogrammetry in mind. And I thought this would be quite a useful resource because here I could compare the site in its condition back then, just 3 years ago, to what it looks like now with the latest laser scan data that we've acquired. So what I've been doing here is I've been using this open source photogrammetry software called Colmap to align condition assessment photos. So when I say the photos weren't taken with photogrammetry in mind, they were taken across various different days and months in different conditions. So you can see the top ones, it was very bright, and then in some it was rainy, and they weren't overlapping very well either. But I wanted to see if we could get a good data set out of these. So a great thing about Colmap is you can force it to align all photos rather than just the best few matches, which I think is the default setting in software such as Photoscan. So by doing that, it was able to cross-check all of these different image pairs, and it gives you quite a nice live view of the SFM process going on, which is what you just saw in that little video. So I let that run for a very, very long time, and what we were able to generate is actually quite a decent data set. So it created 10 separate chunks, which I had to then align. So what I did there was I used some drone photography that we took last year, which has coordinate data, and I was able to align these 10 separate chunks of Colmap data in Cloud Compare, and the photo you can see at the bottom there, that just shows you all of the chunks in alignment. So we have got quite a few missing areas, and this is a rough alignment, but in areas such as the inner broch walls and in the wheelhouse cells, it's actually got quite a lot of data, so I'm hoping to be able to use that in a bit more of my research. So I've got quite a few other ongoing analyses taking place. So another one of the key things I'm looking at in my PhD is looking at where changes and alterations have been made over time, especially in the last 200 years when we have image records of the sites. So this is quite a nice example at Mousa, where in 1919, when the Ministry of Works took over the site, they made a drastic change to the doorway, lowering it to what they then thought was the more accurate to Iron Age level, which is quite a massive change. So really, I think we want to look into things like this because it gives us insights into, conservation practices in the past, and to kind of get an idea of why people were doing things like this. Also, one of the great things about using laser scan data is it can give us views of structures and architecture in ways that was not previously possible. So I'm using, for example, scan data of Mousa to really look into detail at how the staircase is aligned. That's still some ongoing work I'm doing. One of the things I really want to do is some dynamic engineering modelling of 3D data to test different archaeological theories that have been taking place to interpret Brochs, for example, where they roofed, how were they roofed, and whether there really were different floor levels across these sites. And importantly for my project partners, I'm also looking at how these sites have eroded and weathered through time. So I mentioned earlier, I am using the AHRC earlier laser scan data sets, because what that's helped me achieve is compare how the site has eroded in the last 10 or so years, as well as going all the way back to like the 1850s when I got Dryden's drawings to compare them against. Right, some future things I'm doing, I'm hoping to analyse Old Scatness and Jarlshof at the time of their excavations, again using a similar method to how I've done the Colmap SFM of Old Scatness. I want to see whether it's possible to digitise and create 3D models of Old Scatness and Jarlshof using the excavation photos that were taken at that time. And I also want to identify patterns and similarities in their architecture, because I think importantly for Iron Age archaeology, I think that would give us some real insights into how ideas of construction were shared for these brochs in southern Shetland at that time. And I'm kind of running out of time now, so I think I'll just summarise that using all of these different techniques, essentially what I'm trying to do with PhD is build a biography of these three sites from the Iron Age through to the present day, and seeing how all of these different changes have been taking place. That's where I'm up to, really. I've got a lot more analysis to do, so hopefully at the next presentation I'll have more results to show. Thank you very much.